Welcome everyone in today's virtual CP meeting on valuation. So before starting the meeting, I request everyone to raise for I say motto.
य एष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति य एष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति कामं 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 कामपुरुषो पुरुषो निर्मिमाणः निर्मिमाणः तदेव शुक्रं तद्ब्रह्मा तद्ब्रह्मा तदेवामृतमुच्यते तस्मिन् लोकः शतः सर्वे तदूनात्यपि कश्चन एतद्द्वैता 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 एतद्द्वैता।
Hello. So welcome everyone in today's virtual meeting on valuation. So before now, I request C. Jawad Shah to formally introduce our learned speaker, C. Sujal Shah.
Thank you, Ravi. Uh, I welcome CA Sujal Shah on the current today's virtual seminar on valuation, current trends, and future outlook. Sujal Shah is a practicing chartered accountant having an overall post qualification experience of about 28 years. He is a founder partner of SSPA and Company, Chartered Accountant Mumbai, and is involved in corporate consultancy practice of the firm. He was partner of Messrs. NM Raiji and Company till October 2006. His main areas of practice are valuation for mergers and acquisitions, advising on restructuring of business, conducting financial due diligence, and general corporate advisory. He has been associated with several large corporate mergers. He has carried out financial valuations of well-reputed Indian and multinational companies. He has authored several papers on subjects of valuations and restructuring for WRC and BCAs. He is the contributor to the reference published by the Bombay Chartered Accountants Society and WRC of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. He is a regular speaker at various forums, including the ICAI, Institute of Company Secretaries on Mergers and Acquisitions, Valuations, Due Diligence Reviews, etc. He was one of the team members involved in drafting valuation standards for ICAI. He is an independent director on the board of listed as well unlisted companies. He was president of the Chamber of Tax Consultants for the year 2010 and 11. With this brief introduction, I welcome CA Sujal Shah and request him to start the current proceedings.
And also one more at our BCSE we have ranks that instead of giving and we have contributed rupees 500 on behalf of CA Sujal Shah in CA Benefit Fund.
Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you for the kind introduction and good evening to everyone. So we have this 2-hour session on the subject of valuation, the current trends and the future outlook. And I will start sharing the screen. And what I suggest that we will have the presentation for about 1.5 hours. And then we'll leave the platform open for any questions, which we can take in next 15-20 minutes. I believe the session needs to be completed by 7 p.m. So we will respect that timelines given by the organizers, and we will try to cover most of the points by that time. I will start sharing the screen. So friends, unlike earlier sessions which I have taken at the same study circle, where I had taken the members through various methods of valuation and various peculiar adjustments in valuation, this time the organizers wanted me to take up something different, of course, under the overall subject of valuation. So what we thought was to cover what is the current trend in the valuation and what is the future outlook. There are many questions which are asked about the future of this practice. That valuation is now becoming extremely popular with number of transactions of mergers and acquisitions increasing. The need for valuations is also rising substantially. There are many family settlements happening. There is a huge amount of inflow of foreign exchange as we have seen over last couple of months. So for all such transactions, valuation is the prime point, and that's where many professional brothers and sisters have come and joined this practice of valuation, which was not so popular maybe a decade back. Earlier, there was a perception by the professional that this subject of valuation is very, very scientific, very kind of a rocket science. But I have been telling this in most of the seminars that, friends, it is more of application of common sense, some basic reading about what is happening around us in terms of the transactions and various corporate structures which are possible, and applying our mind to ultimately evaluate a company or a business or a share, as the case may be. So it's not a difficult subject. Only thing, you need to have a mindset to learn something new. And the best part of this practice is that you learn every day something new. Whether it is a new industry, today you may be valuing a software company, tomorrow you may be valuing a pharma company, day after you may have a cement company. So you learn about various industries on a regular basis. Further, on a particular occasion, you may value the shares of a company. Other day, you have to value the business of a company. Some other requirement could be for valuation of intangibles. Sometimes a different financial instrument needs to be valued. So, from a variety perspective, this field of valuation is very, very interesting. Of course, as the subject itself covers, the more the variety, the more the need for professionals to be geared. And that is where this requires also for any professionals to be quite up to date on various aspects of the company, or aspects of the valuation. Now, I'll give you a simple example that, today, if I am into valuation practice for last so many years, we cannot take a stand that we don't know certain very basic features of taxation, because without taxation, knowing the taxation, you can substantially go wrong in the valuation exercise. Similarly, if you don't know the accounting standard, if you don't know how Ind AS works, and how the disclosures are made, you will not be able to read the financials of a company which you need to value properly. So all this is intertangled field. However, more concentration is valuation, but you need to have basic knowledge of most of the other subjects. Yeah, likewise, direct tax is also, you need to know some basics of indirect taxation also, stamp duty also, certain legal aspects of various structures of amalgamation possible, Companies Act knowledge also. So that way, this field requires you to be up to date on variety of fields. And according to me, next 1 decade, the requirement of valuation will further increase substantially because of the sheer number of transactions which we are seeing. So today I have tried to cover some of the important aspects. Let me just see how I can change the slide. It's not changing. So 1 minute, I'm not able to change the slide from here. Yes. So basically today we let us cover how this field has evolved over a period of time. What is this new concept of registered valuers which we are hearing recent times? Under various laws, which are the valuation requirements and how it works. I also thought that some of the members, participants could be new to the subject. So I have also tried to cover some very basics of valuation methods and some of the issues involved in the valuation. Then what I'm covering today is certain recent deals and how typically when you are evaluating such transactions or when you're reading such transaction, you need to look at it. The most common question in recent seminars which I have taken up is that what are the things to be looked at when you are valuing a startup. So that also I'm trying to cover, and some of the basic aspect of future outlook as I see it for this profession, where which may unfold in recent times. So that's broadly what I need to cover, and we'll start, with the evolution. So prior to the SEBI coming into the picture or the scene, earlier we had only those wealth tax rules under 1957 Act, where some of the methods of valuations were prescribed for valuing the unquoted shares. After that, we had, before SEBI came into the picture, we had this erstwhile CCI guidelines, Controller of Capital Issues, where they had given the guidance as to what kind of premium calculation can be done when one is coming out with a public offer. So thereafter, in the 1992, according to me, was a major shift in the the financial market when SEBI Act was enacted, and we had that concept of merchant bankers registration, and the IPO pricing was made free. So that was a threshold year, after which the whole concept of valuation and the requirement of valuation, the way regulators look at this valuation, everything has changed post 1992. Of course, as the India opened up its economy, not that the transactions were not happening prior to the opening up of the economy. Transactions were happening prior to that also. However, the quantum of transaction and variety of transactions which we are seeing post the opening up of the economy starting from the early 90s is huge as compared to what happened prior to that. In fact, if some of you may recall that when the Indian economy got opened, first the companies went through various internal restructuring. So, for example, three power companies of Tata's were merged. Brook Bond and Hindustan Lever was merged. Then Hindustan Ciba-Geigy and Sandoz got merged. So, variety of such transactions which were more of within the group transactions started happening in the early 90s. Thereafter, we saw intra-group transaction. That means Tata Oil Mills being acquired by uh, Hindustan Lever was one of the classic examples of different groups coming and amalgamating their operations. So we saw some transaction in that. Then after we had the Tetley acquisition, one of the largest acquisition in those period of time, where the Indian company acquired a foreign company. So inward and outward transactions started happening, and thereafter various SEBI regulations were introduced. So from 90s to 2010, we have seen various different guidelines given for valuation, various different guidance about the methodology or the weightages. Some of these were also guided by the judgment of the Supreme Court in particular cases of valuations which got challenged. So the example which I gave you, Hindustan Lever and Tata Oil Mills, was a classic case of valuation which got challenged by the minority shareholder and the employee union of Hindustan Lever, who challenged this merger. And one of the points in the merger they challenged was the valuation in the early 90s. I think somewhere around 94. And till today, we consider Hindustan Lever and Tomco judgment, Tata Oil Mills judgment, as one of the Bible for valuation, because the way the whole judgment is drafted and the way the guidance is given in that judgment continues to prevail in various other subsequent judgments, whether it is Cadila and the German Remedies judgment, or whether it is Park Davis and Pfizer judgment, or as late as last couple of years back, Cadbury judgment. All these judgments are ultimately evolved through Hindustan Lever and Topco judgments. And we have seen principle laid down by that judgment today also holds goods in certain cases. In the year 2010, when FEMA introduced, first it started with whenever there was an inward and outward transaction, that means foreign exchange was coming in the country or foreign exchange was going out of the country, FEMA guidelines were formed up on valuation. And first they started with that every such transaction, a DCF valuation was the only methodology which they approved of. Thereafter, a couple of years after that, they realized that one cannot apply DCF blindly for all the categories of companies. So if I may give you an example, suppose for a banking company or a NBFC company, DCF may not be a very ideal method of calculating a valuation of the companies. There may be price to book value method, or in some cases price to earning or EBITDA multiple method could be a better alternative. So that's where FEMA guidelines also got changed, and now it allows any internationally acceptable method for any transaction of inward or outward transaction of foreign exchange. So that was another landmark event in the evolution of the valuation field. Year 2017 and 2018 became again the most important years in the entire profession for valuers, because the Ministry of Corporate Affairs enacted the Companies Act and the valuation registered valuation rules regarding to the in the year 2017, which was effective from 18th October 2017. got introduced, and that is where the whole registered valuer concept was became popular. And our institute was, I must say, we are proud to be part of this institute, which became the first institute to come out with their valuation standards. As of now, we have only couple of standards which are in place, but we were the first one to come out with the valuation standards. And no other institute up till now has come out with their own standards. Everybody is following either international standards, or some of them may follow the Indian standard enacted by the Institute of Chartered Accountants. So I think to that extent we were quite very fast in introducing our own valuation standards, which were effective from 1st of July 2018. So typically any chartered accountant giving any valuation post 1st July 2018, and who is registered with the CA Institute, will have to follow the valuation standards enacted by the CA Institute. And they are all available on the website of the institute, and they're one has tried to make it as easy to understand as possible. And I believe institute or the registered valuer organization comes out with various guidance on the various standards also on a regular basis. So a lot of work is being done to popularize this standard. I will also, when we look at the regulations, I will also tell you that what is being also worked out for alternate valuation standards also. Year 2020, I think just before the lockdown or while the lockdown was on, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs notified draft valuers bill. This was sometime in April 2020, and that was made available for the public comments. And I believe lots of organizations and the firms have given their submission on the valuers bill, and we may after some time, maybe after proper procedure being followed, we may see this as an act going forward. So this is the whole cycle which has gone up till now. We are still evolving. It is not yet a stable practice area, or not a stable area of for the professionals or for the corporates or for the people who are involved in the transaction. So it still will take, according to me, another 5 to 7 years to fully get stabilized. And as you will appreciate, this field is unlike other fields where, once the principles are laid down, it remains there for many years. In this field, we will have to continuously upgrade in terms of the various even standards or the methodologies as we go along, because where various things are changing, and that's where we'll have to also match with that speed. So that way it's a quite an active field, and one will not be able to lay back and say that, okay, now I have passed the exam, so I can do any valuation. It is frankly, we are also student, although we may be doing this for many years. I consider myself as a student of valuer because valuation, because it's a learning process on a day-to-day basis. Okay, moving forward, let me tell you section 247 of the Companies Act, which got introduced. They have prescribed that valuation of property, stock, shares, debentures, securities, goodwill or other assets or liabilities or net worth of a company is required to be done by a registered valuer. Appointment has to be either by the audit committee, or in absence of the audit committee, by the board of the directors of the company. Now, what they expect from valuer under the Companies Act 247(2) says, valuer has to make a registered valuer has to make an impartial, true and fair valuation of assets. So here again, they have given you a broad guidelines of what they are expecting from the valuers. The valuer has to exercise due diligence while performing the functions of valuer. Now here, friends, this is slightly different than the financial due diligence, which is a separate area of practice only. Here they want you to be diligent, not that every valuation assignment you need to do a financial due diligence. In most cases, you have to, I think what they mean is that you have to keep your eyes and ears open, and you have to be diligent while carrying out the valuation exercise. Then it says that make the valuation in accordance with such rules as may be prescribed. So if you are issuing a valuation certificate or issuing a report of valuation under the Companies Act, you have to follow the rules which the Companies Act and the rules which are prescribed. Another thing they give a guidance is not to undertake valuation of any assets in which he has a direct or indirect interest, or become so interested at any time during a period of 3 years prior to this appointment or as the valuer, or 3 years after the valuation of assets was conducted by him. Now, this is a slightly peculiar requirement, and I'm not sure in practice how you are going to follow this. First of all, there is no clarity about what is a direct or indirect interest. Now, suppose I'm just giving an example. If somebody tells me to value Hindustan Unilever, and if I am holding 10 shares of the company, which is a absolute micro minority of the shareholding, whether still it will be considered as a direct interest in the company, or it will be, because it is not material, it will not be considered as direct interest. Indirect interest could, I can understand if there is some relative who is working in the company, or some father-in-law, son-in-law type of relationship, which is there, where you can't value a company in which you have a relative working, or who is who is a key managerial person in that company. So those at least you can make out, or you can make your own rules. But this direct financial investment, whether it will be considered as a uh, conflict of interest or not, is something which is a gray area. I believe all the firms have laid down their own principles or own rules to meet with these guidelines. So I've heard about some firms saying that unless you hold shares which are having a face value of more than 1 lakh rupees, you will not consider this as a direct financial interest. Or they've also prescribed in certain percentages. So say 1 lakh of face value, or below 5%. So all the firms have evolved their own rules for this. Another second condition is about this 3 years prior. So if today I get a valuation assignment for Hindustan Unilever, and maybe 2 years back, if I have done some consultancy assignment of Hindustan Unilever, again whether it will be considered as a interest, because I have done prior to 3 years of the doing the valuation. Now, if I was involved in any consultancy or any other professional work for that organization, I can understand, and I think it will be easier to follow for every firm for 3 year post the transaction, post the valuation. That is easy to operate, because when you are doing the valuation, say of Hindustan Unilever, next 3 years you can't have any financial interest, direct or indirect interest. That I think is easy to follow. What is difficult to follow is prior to the valuation. How do you follow these 3 years? What they have prescribed. I think again time will evolve, and some guidance, further guidance may come in this respect. Till that time, what I have gathered, and I have also taken some legal opinion from some firms, where everybody says that you lay down your own rules and at least follow that, so that tomorrow you can demonstrate that you have no direct or indirect interest in the company which you are valuing. Now, let us understand the whole mechanics of how these registered valuers monitoring or regulations operate. So one is, the first is, there is an authority which government has appointed, which is today IBBI, which is Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India, which is the authority to administer and perform the functions under the rules. So they are like a disciplinary mechanism on the top. Below this IBBI, there are RVOs, which is called Registered Valuer Organization. So you may have also come across ICAI has their own RVO, ICSI has their own RVO. Likewise, there are multiple RVOs which are already registered. Numbers, I think, is around 10 to 15, or it could be slightly different. But so below IBBI, you have Registered Valuer Organization. And as a member of the institute, if I have become a registered valuer under ICAI RVO, I'm a registered valuer, but I am under ICAI RVO, and also ultimately being monitored by IBBI. So today, if I'm registered valuer, I need to also on a 6-month basis supply certain information to IBBI through RVO, which is mainly covering what companies you have valued and what all exactly you have done in terms of the assignments. So that track has been now being kept by the IBBI through the respective RVOs. RVOs also play a very important role in training the registered valuers. See, it is not only passing the exam, friends. It is after passing the exam also you need to continuously sharpen your knowledge and understand various methodologies, various requirements, regulations. So for which our ICI RVO and also other RVOs continuously hold program, which is like our CPE programs. Even CPE, we have to have a 16-hour CPE for every financial year under RVO also. So being a chartered accountant, I have one mandate from ICI to continue to be a member under practice. I have to follow certain rule of CPE requirements. Being a member of RVO and registered valuer, another additional 16 hours of CPE I need to carry out, because if I want to continue as a registered valuer under the RVO. Now there at least the IBBI has given the flexibility that although I may be registered under ICAI RVO, I may do the CPE credit or CPE courses under ICSI RVO. That flexibility they have given. Only I need to submit a certificate of participation of Company Secretary Institute RVO to our ICAI RVO. That's only a procedural aspect. So many of the chartered accountant friends have not registered as a registered valuer through ICAI RVO. They've passed the exam, not passed the exam, they've done this course through another RVOs, because sometimes the course timelines do not match with your availability. And sometimes the other institute are doing this courses 7 days a week. So in one shot it gets over. Whereas, maybe ICAI RVO sometimes carries out this program over a period of time. So depending on everybody's suitability, they select the RVOs. My personal view is that very strictly, if I think from my personal comfort point of view, it is always better to be attached to the institute from where you have done your basic degree, because then it becomes extremely smooth for you to get a further certification. Because every RVO has to, before registering a registered valuer or before even sending your application to IBBI, has to also issue a certificate that no disciplinary cases are pending against you and other any adverse remarks are there in your profession likewise. So that it becomes extremely easy for us if we are registered with ICAI RVO, because ICAI has all our records. Otherwise, if I go through other institute, that other institute has to write to ICAI, get this certificate. So timeline wise, it is quite, takes away a lot of time. So from a convenience point of view, I personally believe that, do the course with the same institute from where you have done your basic degree. So it becomes extremely easy for you to, get the registration. Examination, lot of questions are asked by the members that how difficult is this examination. So I had appeared in the first batch of the ICI when the registered valuer the whole concept was introduced, and the first time the exams were taken. So if I sort of claim that I knew everything of valuation, for a couple of attempts I could not clear, because there are many other questions being asked also apart from valuations. Because not that we don't know the subject, but we are not up to date on those subjects. Like example, certain things on the economy, certain RBI acts. So various other laws are also, Contract Act, Sale of Goods Act, various this we have studied our while passing the CA exam. But you need to refresh them, and you need to be not only have a basic knowledge, but you should have that presence of mind to answer those questions within the prescribed time. So I would not say that it's a very difficult exam, but at the same time, don't take this as a lightly, and prepare well. It will ultimately benefit you only, because as you brush up your knowledge, it will help you in ultimately carrying out the valuation. Don't go only with the intention of passing the exam. Passing the exam is not your goal. Your goal is becoming a good valuer. So try to understand these subjects well, read properly, and then appear for exam. This is applicable only for those members who have not yet cleared the exam. There was one question just before the session that whether it makes sense to clear this exam and keep it ready. I would always feel that it is always better to be registered, whether you have the practice or not at this juncture, because going forward, the need for valuation, and as we will see it in the subsequent slides, you will appreciate that the need for this subject is going to increase, and professionals will be able to fruitfully get engaged more and more on this area of practice. So I feel that it is the right time for everyone who is not yet clear to start preparing for this course. And mind you, friends, prior to this registered valuer concept, chartered accountants sort of had the monopoly to be the valuers. Most of the valuation works were going to chartered accountants and to some extent to the merchant bankers, investment bankers. But now you are competing with even BCom with certain number of years of experience, company secretary, cost accountant, chartered accountants, MBAs. So you have now a whole lot of competition with whom you have to sort of compete and get the work on valuation. Personally, I believe that as long as I think we still have an advantage over others, because we while doing CA we get lots of all-round knowledge of income tax, indirect tax, finance, Companies Act. So we are that way quite fortunate to have carried out this course of chartered accountancy, whereby otherwise also we learn various subjects. So for us, according to me, it's a right now easiest entry. For others, it could be difficult. So, for example, without just taking any credit away, but for example, for a company secretary, certain subjects of valuation could be slightly difficult to catch up. For example, the financial calculations and all that. Not that they are not capable, but because they have a different field of activity, for them it may take some extra time. Whereas we have already learned that in our CA course. So for us, it is very easy. So better, to get this registered valuer tag over and above your CA degree, because it will, I think, going forward, definitely evolve and give us a huge amount of, number of assignments. Wise, it is increasing substantially. Now, coming to the registered valuer, as of now, the government has kept this concept of registered valuer restricted only to valuations which are done under the Companies Act. And I will take you through some of the trigger points of valuation. So today, if you are doing a valuation under Rule 11 of the Income Tax Act, or if you are doing under FEMA, you don't need to be a registered valuer. My personal view is that going forward, most of the acts will change, that whenever there is a need of valuation, let it be coming from a registered valuer. Days are not far, according to me, when these regulations will change. And 2020 valuers bill, which I have just mentioned to you in that earlier slide, you will see that the whole concept of valuer is changing. And in fact, if that is enacted, then we have a different challenge for all the professionals. So that also we'll have to do further compliance work, and that we'll see when we come to that respective slide. So today, what the rule says, that unless there is a valuation standard which is notified by central government, a valuer shall make valuation as per internationally accepted valuation standards or valuation standards adopted by any RVO. Now we are the only RVO. ICAI is the only RVO which has adopted ICAI's valuation standard. So otherwise, most of the other RVOs are following internationally accepted valuation standards. Now let us go through quickly what are the different under different acts where the valuations get triggered and where all your role as a valuer will be required. So first, if we go through the Companies Act requirement, and these are, friends, indicative list, it's not an exhaustive list. What is more commonly being used, I have just placed it there, that on the screen. So section 54, this is for SWAT issue equity shares. Section 62 is for issue of shares or convertible instruments. Section 67 for provision of money by a company for purchase of its own shares by employees or trustees for the benefit of employees. 192, transaction involving transfer of assets for non-cash consideration. So many times you see shares are being issued for transfer of any other assets to the person who has provided those assets, either from directors or from promoters. Again, that valuation is to be done by a registered valuer. Going forward, section 230 and 232, which takes care of the amalgamation requirement or scheme of arrangement related requirement, whether it is merger or demergers. That also, or a corporate debt restructuring. That also needs to be done by a registered valuer. Section 234, cross-border merger of an Indian company into foreign company or vice versa. Section 236, which is for purchase of minority shareholding, and Section 281, which is for winding up of a company. These are, friends, some of the trigger points under which the valuation is required under the Companies Act, which is to be done by a registered valuer. There are some other instances also, but I'm not covering all of them. So this, again, you will appreciate that this has opened up a huge requirement of valuation. So technically, for every new issue of shares by a company, you need a valuation report. Any sweat equity or ESOP, you need a valuation from a registered valuer. For any buying of shares from a minority shareholder, you need a valuation report. So variety of avenues are getting opened even under the Companies Act for the valuation practice. Now, if we go through the FEMA related activities, so under the FEMA, what are the different transactions where the valuation is being sought for? So first could be issue of shares or securities by an Indian company to a non-resident. Second could be transfer of shares of securities of Indian company by a resident to a person who is non-resident, or transfer of shares of securities of an Indian company by a person by a non-resident in favor of resident. So for all this, under the FEMA, they need a valuation. Now again, at the cost of repetition, friends, under the FEMA, the requirement is to be a chartered accountant and not a registered valuer. As we speak, right now, only a chartered accountant or a CA firm can issue a report under the FEMA guidelines for these transactions which are listed on the screen. Now, how do you value the shares? So they have also given the guidance that if shares are listed, then they've given that if the price which is in accordance with the SEBI guidelines or preferential allotment guidelines, or if it is for a delisting process, the delisting guidelines. So basically, listed companies, there is not a problem because it is a straightforward formula-based thing. For unlisted securities, the FEMA says, and this is what I was mentioning in the earlier slide, that any internationally accepted pricing methodology for valuation on an arm's length basis, duly certified by a chartered accountant or a SEBI registered category 1 merchant maker, or a practicing cost accountant. Now, friends, so here for any unlisted security, you have given the option of valuation by a chartered accountant, merchant maker, or a cost accountant. The third bullet, which is more of an outward investment, that means investment by an Indian company for acquisition of foreign companies' shares. Now there is a twist whereby if the consideration exceeds $5 million, the valuation needs to be done by a category 1 merchant banker. However, in all other cases, either it has to be a chartered accountant or a certified public accountant if you are obtaining the valuation report from the geography from where you are buying these shares. So any Indian company buying shares of a foreign company, if the consideration is more than $5 million, the valuation report necessarily will have to be by a category 1 merchant banker. Whereas in other cases, either a chartered accountant of India or a CPA of that particular target country from where you are buying the shares will have to be obtained. Now, I'm not very sure because many times this question is asked that why for inward remittance there is no restriction of this $5 million, whereas only for outward remittance you are keeping this restriction. And I think in number of seminars this question is being asked. I also fail to understand the logic that only for outward remittance over 5 million you need as a chartered accountant you can't issue a report. But suppose 100 million USD is coming inside the country as a new investment, you can, as a chartered accountant, you can issue the report. So that logic is not something which I am able to grasp. But anyway, that's the rule, so we have to follow the rule. Now let us come to certain trigger points under the Income Tax Act. Now section 56(2)(7)(b) for issue of unquoted shares. The fair market value of such shares to be computed in accordance with Rule 11(a). Now friends, here also, as you will be aware that couple of years back, for new issue of shares where discounted cash flow method is being used for justifying the price. As a chartered accountant, earlier we were allowed to issue the report and our reports were being accepted, but now only a merchant banker's report is being accepted. For issue of shares where DCF is not used, that means you are following other method of valuation, which is asset minus liability. There again, chartered accountant is permitted to issue the report. Under 56(2)(10) and section 50(ca) for transfer of unquoted shares, which also covers sum of money, immovable property or other property, will need a valuation report. Again, here it is permitted to be given by a chartered accountant. Under 50B for a slump sale of a business, and under section 92, which are transfer pricing guidelines, again valuation will have to be given. There the principle to be followed it on an arm's length basis, the value of the company or the IPR, as the case may be, needs to be satisfied. Now let us come to the SEBI requirement of Securities and Exchange Board of India for the valuation. So if I look at the regulation for SEBI substantial acquisition of shares and takeover, which is in the loose term called takeover code. So there again, if you are valuing a frequently traded shares, there they have given the volume weighted average market price of such shares for a period of 60 trading days immediately preceding the date of the public announcement as traded on the stock exchange, where the maximum value of trading in the shares of the target company are recorded during such period. So for example, shares are traded on BSE as well as NSE. So you have to take the price of the exchange where maximum quantity is being traded and last 60 days price prior to the announcement, public announcement for this takeover. However, for non-frequently traded shares or an unquoted shares, you have to price determined by the acquirer and the manager to the open offer, taking into account. So here the SEBI regulations gives you some leads as to how you can do the valuation. So it says the price determined by the acquirer and the manager to the open offer, taking into account valuation parameters including book value, comparable trading multiples, and such other parameters as are customary for valuation of such companies. So friends, here the SEBI guidelines have given you a freedom that if you believe that for a particular category of company, book value method is more relevant and other methods are not relevant, you may choose to use only book value multiple method, or you may use a combination of the two methods, that is book value as well as comparable multiple transaction for multiple methodology. So there the flexibility is given to the valuer as long as it is giving the reasons that why a particular approach or the method is being ruled out. Now, in terms of the SEBI issue of capital and disclosure requirements regulations 2018, which is ICDR regulation as we call, there so this is basically for a listed company if you are going for a preferential allotment of shares. What it says is that average weekly high and now this is weekly high and low. Earlier regulation was the the volume weighted average market price. If you see the first line, whereas here in the preferential issue guidelines it says higher of the two following, which is average of the weekly high and low of the volume weighted average. So again, weekly you have to work out weekly and then arrive at the average of that and then take the average of that for 26 weeks. So that or the average of the weekly high and low of the volume weighted average price of that particular shares over a period of 2 weeks preceding the relevant date. Relevant date is the board meeting date prior on the date on which the preferential issue is announced. So why this they've given here the combination of two prices, because it is possible that when you are going for a preferential allotment and the prices near the date of the announcement were much higher as compared to a 26 week. In many cases, what it used to happen, because one was taking 26 weeks average, the price was getting substantially reduced because over almost 6 months period, the averaging was done. But last 2 weeks, suppose the prices have substantially increased, then the regulation says, then you bring it at that price. So higher of the two. And again, when the shares are not frequently traded or when you went to issue the preferential issue, you can use the methodology which is taking into account the book value or comparable trading multiple method, and such other parameters which are customary. So again, they have given here the flexibility. And there is also definition of what is frequently traded, what is not frequently traded. So they have given a percentage of share capital of the company. If the company shares are traded over a period of 1 year, beyond 10%, then it is called frequently traded. If it is traded below 10% of the share capital of the company, it will be considered as an infrequently traded share. So that is where I think the SEBI guidelines has made it clear. Now, the table which you are seeing on the screen is the new table which the SEBI introduced before a couple of years, I think about 4 years back. Now, let me explain you what it is. Now, when you do a merger of two companies, the valuer used to give a value, the ultimate deliverable of the valuer was for X number of shares of the transferor company, Y number of shares of transferee company will be issued. So, example, if Park Davis is merging with Pfizer, then what we used to say that for every 10 shares of Park Davis, 4 shares of Pfizer will be issued upon the amalgamation. So it was giving only a swap ratio. So up till this particular circular which SEBI introduced, valuers in their report was just concluding by giving a swap ratio, and detailed calculations were not given that what is the value under each method. Now SEBI, I think, came across certain cases where they thought that the fair value based on which the swap ratios are calculated and recommended by the valuers is not appropriately calculated, and correct display is not given. So SEBI said that for any merger transaction or for any demerger of a business into another operating company, you give the final conclusion in this particular format. So I have given this XYZ and PQR. So if the PQR was merging with XYZ, what you need to do is under asset approach, income approach, and market approach, you work out the value per share and also apply the weight, which is given in the, I have written in A, B, and C format. A value per share of this another company, again, which gives the values and also give different weights. And then you work out the relative value per share by arriving at the weighted average value for each of these companies, based on which the exchange ratio was recommended. Now here, friends, it may be a right opportunity to tell you that when you issue a report for a merger or a demerger, what is your role as a valuer is only a recommendation. Don't use the words like I hereby certify that the swap ratio for merger of Park Davis into Pfizer should be so and so. You are not here certifying the swap ratio. It is not a certificate of net worth as we do it for some other requirements. It is a recommendation to the audit committee and the board and the stakeholders of your recommendation of the swap ratio. It's not a certification. So many times, the valuation report says valuation certificate for the swap ratio. It is, friends, it is always valuation report for the swap ratio. And when you give a final fair value paragraph, don't use the word like according to us, the fair value, we certify that the swap ratio or the fair value of the company is so and so. It is an expression of an opinion. So you are only recommending, and the subject being so subjective, and it can change different between two valuers. The swap ratio will never match, or it may match only with certain different parameters. In that case, your ending part of the report or your conclusion part of the report will always say, in our opinion, the fair swap ratio for this amalgamation will be so and so. So that is where some of the reports, when I saw it, I realized that people are using the word certification for the valuation report. So please keep that in mind. It is only a recommendation. Your role ends as a recommendation and not as a certification. It is very much possible that the board of directors or the audit committee may completely reject your report. In that case, you are recommended and they have rejected. Not necessarily that in every case they will accept your report. And there are number of instances where it is possible that when you submit a report, the board is not in agreement. They feel that it is not properly done, so they may reject the report.
Sujal bhai.
Yes, please.
Sir, you need to start your screen sharing.
Again,
You need to start your screen sharing, sir.
okay, I'll just do that. The good you told me. I don't know how it got disconnected. Is it now visible?
Yeah, sir.
Yeah, now it is visible.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Sorry for that. Okay, so this is the format under which you need to give the valuation report when you are submitting for the amalgamation. And friends, as you will appreciate, because now as far as SEBI is concerned, SEBI says that this report has to be given in this particular format, and this is under the Companies Act. This report will have to be given by a chartered accountant also, and also registered valuer. Now SEBI has come out recently with a circular where they have said that registered valuer can give this report also. So earlier to that circular, what was happening? There was one report because SEBI earlier said a chartered accountant or chartered accountant firm needs to give a report. Under the Companies Act, you needed a registered valuer, and that's where there was a confusion that you whether you need to obtain two reports. I believe now last about a month back or so, one circular SEBI issued whereby a single report was accepted. Otherwise, we have seen in many mergers, there were multiple reports obtained by the companies because that clarity was not there. Okay, now next maybe 5-10 minutes, let us go through the methods of valuation. As you will appreciate, friends, this is a very detailed sort of subject by itself. So what I have tried to do is to try to cover some very basic aspects of valuation, because some of my professional friends may not be conversant with the valuation methods. So for the sake of completeness, it will help us to go through these methods and various adjustments, so that whenever they get an assignment of this nature, at least they will be able to handle it with proper due justification. So friends, valuation, value and price generally is not the same. It is very rare circumstance that when you issue a valuation report, the transaction happens at the same value. Uh, the transaction will happen at a price where ultimately buyer and seller concludes the negotiation, which could be different than the fair valuation report which you may issue, because there could be so many other factors which may become prevalent for the ultimate parties to ultimately conclude the transaction. Somebody could be in a dire need for money, so he may sell it at below the fair value. Sometimes the acquirer could be very aggressive and very enthusiastic, so he may pay a very high price. So there are multiple factors which can lead to a situation where price and value could be different. In a very rare scenario, you will find value and price being matching to each other. Valuation is not an exact science, as you will appreciate. There are so many aspects which is subjective in nature. For example, treatment of contingent liabilities, application of multiple comparable companies multiple, or discount rate for the DCF method, impact of the surplus assets. All these are typical situations whereby the two valuers will never come to a same valuation, and that is where subjectiveness is established. And friends, most of the regulators also appreciate this fact that valuation being a subjective, it is not necessary that two valuers doing the valuation of a company will come up with the same kind of results. It is a very date specific thing. So today, if I do a valuation, it being a perishable nature, it may be not valid after a week, because there could be events which can happen between the two dates which may make this valuation redundant. So I would always suggest to my valuer friends that try to do the valuation as near the date of transaction as possible, to take into account all the developments in that company or the business or the regulations. Yes, valuation varies with situation. If it is for merger, it's a different way of looking at it, because there you are looking at the relative valuation. If it is liquidation, your entire approach will be different. If it's a going concern valuation, it will be a different parameters. So depending on the situation, your whole approach also will change. Now, different types of assets for which you may be called upon to do the valuation are given in this particular slide. Uh, so it could be securities or financial assets. So here we'll what will fall in this basket is all the instruments, which is shares, debentures, convertible bonds, preference shares, any other warrants. All that will come into the first box. Many times nowadays we are seeing people are reluctant to buy the shares because then they also inherit all the legacies of that company. So people are more comfortable dealing in the business. So on a slump sale basis, businesses are bought or sold to avoid any backlog of the old company being also traveling to the acquirer. So business transfer has become extremely popular mode in the recent times. Intangible assets. Now, many times you may not be interested in the physical facilities or physical customer base or anything else other than the intangibles. That means only a brand. In pharma companies, this is very important that the transaction of only intangibles takes place. Nowadays, we are seeing many times intangibles are required to be valued because companies wants to raise the funds from the banks or financial institution, giving intangible assets of the company as a security. And that's where bankers or lenders will ask for the valuation of those intangible assets. Again, pharma companies, this is very prevalent. Every pharma companies generally have borrowed the money from the market using intangibles as a security, one of the securities. Then land and building valuation and plant and machinery valuation. Now, friends, under the registered valuer concept, you have to register for a particular category of values, for a particular category of instrument. So, as a chartered accountant, if I am registering through ICAI RVO, I will be only entitled for securities or financial assets. Because I don't have a degree of engineering, I will not be able to register under land and building and plant and machinery, nor I will qualify for that exam also. So, however, there are certain firms which are prevalent today who are also registered under all the categories or companies. There are certain companies which are registered under all the categories. So, whether it is a land and building valuation or a plant and machinery or financial instruments, they can do all the three. Whereas if we are registered as under ICAI RVO, today gives a registration or today forwards a registration only for securities or financial assets. There are other categories of valuation also, namely jewelry, drawings, paintings, but that generally is not something where it's a very active field. It is not on the volume front, that may not be very large. Jewelry could be there, but other things are very case specific. Just to give you a flavor, today how many firms are registered as a registered valuer? So today we have totally 3,834. This is the data as of 9th of February. We have about 3,834 registered valuers in total. Out of that, for the securities and financial assets category, 1,469 people have registered. Land and building, 1,972 people have registered, and plant and machinery, 398 registered valuers. Now, being a chartered accountant, you may have done the summation of all the three. This will not match with 3,834 because some categories of valuers have registered for all the three different types of valuation, different types of assets. And just to give you a flavor, about 38 entities, namely the companies or the firms, have also registered as registered valuer today, as of 9th February. This list keeps on increasing on a regular basis. So you need to go through the IBBI website where it gives a latest information about the registrations. Now, very quickly, if I may take you through different triggers of valuation. If it is a business valuation, it could be for restructuring, purchase or sale of business, litigation, family settlement, as I mentioned, has become extremely popular area of practice for valuers because many families are splitting and they need a fair valuation for their settlement. Some are hostile separations, some are very amicable separations, so depending on what kind of confidence level they have on each other and the professional, the whole transaction will be carried out. Fundraising could be another area. On a regulatory front, you may need a valuation for the FEMA guidelines, income tax, SEBI, Companies Act. Intangibles could be for either purchase or sale, or for hypothecation, or for accounting purpose, or many times for impairment testing. For financial reporting, purchase price allocation, which is like if I buy a business for 100 crores, as an acquirer, I need to allocate 100 crores to various asset groups. I cannot write business purchase 100 crores debit to HDFC Bank 100 crores. I need to divide these 100 crores which I paid to various assets. It could be land, building, plant and machinery, current assets, and finally the intangibles. So that's where this exercise is called purchase price allocation. Then again, for private equity, venture capital funds on a regular basis, they need the valuation. Financial instrument valuation. Ind AS, as you know, requires the valuation, particularly for a fair value accounting. Now, what are the sources of information which you will carry out or which you will ask for when you do the valuation, starting with historical results? Now, friends, here I would like to say that many times and this happens regularly with many valuers, they look at only the financials of the company. They don't look at other critical data like board of directors report or management discussion and analysis. These are very critical inputs, because suppose you are looking at the projections, and projections has shown a particular level of growth in the company's operations. Whereas in the directors report, the directors have written a completely opposite tone, saying that business will go down, this, that, competitors are increasing. If that is the case, then your what the board feels and what projections are provided to you by the executive is not matching. So you need to look at all this very clearly. So don't look at only the financial part of the annual report. Look at every single aspects which are relevant. Management discussion, board reports, notes to the accounts. These are some of the very critical inputs. So otherwise, in the enthusiasm of completing the valuation in a very quick way, many times, the professionals ignore the write-ups and just look at the numbers. Now, valuation, one has to keep in mind that it's not only a number game. It has to be a completely holistic approach of understanding the industry, what are the regulatory aspects connected to the industry, and how do you deal with that in the accounts. So accounts also is an important aspect, but not the only aspect which you have to look at. For example, if you are valuing a fertilizer company, now how this subsidy calculation works, how the government releases the subsidy, what are the time lag between the application date and the receipt of money. All these are very critical inputs you need to understand. If you are valuing a sugar industry, you need to know what are the import restrictions, what is the export restrictions, because these regulations keep on changing on a frequent basis. So you need to be up to date about it and not only look at the financial aspect of it. Then future projections, now the even valuation standard suggests to us that you need to review the projections in detail, and then satisfy yourself that the projections or the assumptions for these projections are on a fair basis, considered on a fair basis. Then stock market quotations were very important. If you are valuing a listed company, is to look at last maybe 2 years of announcements given by that company to the exchange. That will give you some very important leads about the company's operations or company's certain developments. For example, if there was a fire in the factory of the company, say 6 months back, and that being a material item, company would have informed the stock exchange that there was a fire and the plant was shut down for 1 month. Now, this is a very critical input for the valuation, because in that case, for the year 2021, if I am applying a multiplier to the EBITDA, year 2021, say 1 month or 2 months, the plant was shut. So the production was not there. So whether it is a representative year or you need to make any adjustment for arriving at the maintainable level of EBITDA, that input will come from such announcement. Many times company people, while giving you the information, will make this entire data available to you. But in many cases, it is for you to find out this data. So that is where this, your review of the various announcement of the company to the exchange is becoming extremely important, because you may find some adjustment to your valuation arising out of those announcements. Then, of course, you look at the publicly available information, not only of the company and also about the comparable company, market surveys or newspaper reports. I would suggest to you that don't give extremely high importance to the newspaper reports, because sometimes newspaper reports are faulty, not intentionally, but sometimes the way it is reported, it is not giving a clear and correct picture of the transaction. So be little more careful. And of course, you will take representation of the management, like you take a representation from the audit clients. You also need to take a representation from the your valuation client also. And our valuation standard of the institute also covers some of the aspects which you need to cover in those representation which you obtain from the client. Very quickly going through the methods of valuation, you have one basket of income approach, which predominantly is giving the methodology of discounted cash flow. Under the market approach, you have market price method. If the shares of the company are listed on the exchange, you use the market price method as one of the methods, or you can also use the comparable companies multiple methods. So for example, if I am valuing a cement company, and the similar company to my company which I am valuing is already listed on the stock exchanges, I will use that comparable companies multiple method with certain adjustments to value the unquoted cement company which is being valued. Similarly, if you have come across some comparable transactions of the in the space in which you are doing a valuation. So let me give you an example of a hotel company. For example, if you are valuing Taj Kolaba, just giving an example, if you are valuing Taj Kolaba and suppose the transaction in Oberoi, which is nearby, or Trident, which is nearby, has already taken place before 2 months at a particular rate, say 5 crores per key. In a hotel industry, what is relevant is what is the value per key. Per key means per how many rooms which are being, which is available for sale. So that is a very important parameter in a hotel industry. So if that transaction is already available to you, so it is in the similar geography, Taj as well as Oberoi or Trident are in the similar geography. They carry a similar set of facilities, and they have a similar set of passenger base. In that case, you can use the transaction multiple of Trident or Oberoi, Nariman Point, for the valuation of Taj Kolaba. Of course, you may have to do certain adjustments depending on the size or number of rooms. That is something which you will have to adjust, make an adjustment for. Moving on, there could be asset approach, which could be a pure net asset value method, which is our asset minus liability method, or it could be replacement value or realizable value method. So if you are going for a liquidation of a company, you need to look at the realizable value of the assets into account. However, if you are looking at a going concern, you may also look at the replacement value. So suppose I have a 2-ton cement 2 metric ton capacity of a particular plant. If a similar plant was to be structured today with similar facilities, what will be the replacement cost of that? That could be one of the parameters. Of course, if you use the plant for 5 years, you need to take into account the depreciated value for the replacement amount. So these are the 3 broad parameters. Again, our valuation standards also describes these approaches and the methods in quite a good detail. So those who are interested in this subject, I would request you to go through our valuation standards, which gives a very good guidance for the valuers in terms of what are the different parameters and what kind of care you need to take while doing the valuation assignments. Now, friends, here it may be appropriate for me to tell you that when you do a valuation exercise, it is always possible to cross-check it with something which is available in the public domain. So, for example, if you are valuing, as I mentioned, the hotel company, if there is a transaction possible to be reviewed, which is comparable or something very similar, then you can do a cross check. So if you do a DCF for a hotel company, and your value comes to say 2 crore per room, per key, whereas the transaction very nearby has happened just before a month at 5 crores per room, you need to then review your calculation that why my valuation is so low, whereas all other parameters are similar to the company for which got traded. That means either you have gone wrong, or your hotel which you are valuing is inferior to the transaction which has happened, and that's why it is throwing a very low value. Say maybe sometimes it is possible that the employee cost is very high in a particular hotel, whereas in other hotel it is on the lower side because some people are taken on contract basis and similar adjustment. So there could be some reason why the valuations will be different. However, when you arrive at a value, try to on a broad basis cross check it with some other parameters. So if you are valuing a say power company, then per megawatt of capacity there are benchmarks which are available. If you are valuing a BPO, business process outsourcing unit, then again you may have some benchmark of value per seat which may be available. So likewise, every industry, if you are valuing a cement company, per ton of capacity, there is a valuation parameter which could be available. If you are valuing a cable company, it could be per number of subscriber and some multiplier which could be possible. So every industry, there is a possibility to have a cross check. So when you arrive at the valuation, try to do that cross check. And if you are coming with a substantially different valuation than the market valuations, try to see what could be the reason. Maybe your valuation is still right and what you have done is very fair. However, you need to then analyze the reason and see that why my valuation which I have worked out is could be higher or lower. So that is something which as a cross check generally you do before you finalize your calculation. Now very quickly, I will not take you through this calculation in detail, just because some of the participants could be new to this subject. I thought it may be a good idea to display this on the screen, and later on you can always it's being an accountant, we will be able to understand this in a very fast and easy way. So you need to just then go through this. And friends, this is not the final format, it is only one of the easiest format or suggested format. The number of adjustments could be much larger, or number of years could be much different as compared to what is displayed on the screen. This is just to give to all of you a little flavor of how this value under this particular method is being carried out. So this is the example of a discounted cash flow method where I have used say 3 years of projections. Here some of the critical factors or inputs could be, I have used a discount rate of 13%, which is the weighted average cost of capital. I have used 5% growth rate for perpetuity. That means my assumption that after 2024, cash flows will rise by 5% on a year-on-year basis. Now, this is an assumption of a valuer. Now, don't hold me responsible for this 5% for every valuation you do. If it's the initial stage of the operations of the company, this 5% could be 8% also, because your base is very small. So you may grow at a much higher rate. But if you are already saturated and you have no capacity left, this 5% could be 0% also. So don't take this as a fixed benchmark or fixed method of valuation. Just try to take the inputs and maybe apply to your case and have a logic for that. As long as you have a justifiable logic to explain your valuation, I believe that even regulators are open enough to take these inputs and understand your logic. So don't get frightened if you are questioned. Only thing, you should have your backup paper in such a way that if you are doing a valuation of a company, you have a full backup of what assumptions you have done and your justification for various parameters which are subjective in nature. The file note must be kept in the file. Another suggestion to you friends will be that when you do a valuation, immediately complete the file and keep it in such a way with all the duly described notes, that tomorrow after 3 years or 5 years, if a inquiry comes, you don't have to search for that person who did the valuation. You may have a file in place, but you don't know where these numbers have come from. So in your file, when you submit a calculation, you should have the reference point of each and every number from where you have picked up. For example, if you have worked out net asset value, you write the reference of the page number of the annual report or some other data points which are available to you. For example, contingent liability, which could be part of the representation letter. So you write that representation letter point number 5.6. That will give you a full indication that from where you picked up this number. It will make your life very easy when somebody tomorrow questions you that where this number has come up from. At least you don't have to search or search for the person who did the valuation at that time, because it is possible that resource is not available with you anymore. So then you don't have to then face the regulator without the person who did the valuation exercise or who help you in valuation exercise. Your file will be a speaking file which will help you to defend your valuation. So justification also, let it be remain in a note form in your file. And I know it's not good for the nature, but certain basic things you keep a printout, because everything if one keeps in a soft form, sometimes for any technological default you may end up into some trouble, because sometimes something may get erased, your hard disk may crash, or your server may face some problem. So better certain basic things you take a print and keep it in your file. I know what I'm speaking is not good for the nature, we less the print we do for the papers, it is good for the nature, but somewhere down the line we have to balance the two. Likewise, here I have given examples for market price method also, where I have taken, here I have given example of 6 months, where I weighted average, turnover divided by volume I have done, and then arrived at the price per share. This is the EBITDA multiple method, which is also called comparable companies multiple method. So here, friends, I have used 3 years results, EBITDA, including the current year, or one more year, 21-22 also. And then given zero weight to the first year 2019-20, and given last 2 years only, that means the current year and one more next future year, I have given the weightage to arrive at the maintainable EBITDA. And then I have applied the enterprise value to EBITDA multiple. In this case, I have applied shown a 9 multiple. Now this is derived from a comparable company. So for example, if I'm valuing a pharma company, I look at the categories of comparable companies of my size. So for example, if my turnover is say 1000 crores, I will look at the companies in the region of anywhere between 700 crores to 1500 crores and take the multiple of those companies. There is no point taking into account a multiple of a company which is having a 10,000 crore multiple, because there the margins could be different, products could be different, the whole size is different. So either you ignore that company or give a very low weightage in the overall calculation to such company. And then there are certain adjustments of valuation of investments, contingent liabilities, surplus cash, loan funds gets reduced. So here, friends, because we are applying a multiplier to the EBITDA, you need to also reduce the loan amounts, because what you arrive at is called an enterprise value. That means a value for all the fund providers. So loan providers or preference capital providers needs to be first funded, and then you arrive at the value for equity shareholders divided by number of shares to arrive at the per share value. This is only to give you a flavor of how this method works. In reality, the number of adjustments, the whole approach could be different. In some cases, I may look at only past and not look at the future. In some case, suppose 2020-21, I consider it as an abnormal year because of COVID. Instead of 535, if the number was 135, I may ignore that year and give a zero weight to the 2020-21, which is the most recent year. Because I'm not taking a call that, every year we will have a COVID impact. Every year we will have a lockdown of 4 to 5 months. That call we are not taking as a valuer. So that's where I may completely ignore or give a very low weight to the year which is impacted by such scenario, because these are once in a century or once in a multiple decades kind of a scenario. So we can't generalize it saying that every year we'll have a COVID-like situation. And this is NAV method, which I think to this, August body, I don't need to explain how it is worked out. It is very simple. Now, some of the important adjustments which are carried out while doing the valuations are given on the slide. The first one I've written is valuation of investment. So many companies, you will appreciate that they are holding huge number of investments in their balance sheet, which are either strategic to the company's operations, or it could be a pure investment for the purpose of financial gain. Now, depending on the nature of those investments, you need to value those investments either on a consolidated basis. That means I will look at Hindustan Unilever on a consolidated basis, because all the investments in the books of Hindustan Unilever are in the business of FMCG or related activities. Then I apply to EBITDA, and on a consolidated EBITDA, I apply a multiplier. However, if 50% of the investments of Hindustan Unilever is pertaining to FMCG, other 50% are in different area of operation, namely pharmaceutical, real estate, or NBFCs, then I will have to do sum of parts. I will have to value each of these investments and add to the value of the company those value of those investments, because they are not, you can't apply a common multiplier to different activities or different segments of investments. Now, friends, if you have appreciation in this value of investment, that means your cost is 100 and your fair value of such investment is say 500. We value this on a net of tax basis. That means if there is an appreciation, I also take into account the tax incidence on those notional appreciation and reduce it from the value. However, there are certain firms of valuers who are also taking it on a gross basis, saying that this company will never sell those investments and it will remain always in your books. So there is no question of any capital gains tax to be paid. My principle is that if I take a notional gain into account, I need to take a notional tax also into account. However, I understand that different firms are following different parameters. I gave you my logic that why you need to take into account the investments on a net of tax basis. Another aspect pertaining to investment is that if you are having a very small cost of investment, don't ignore it, because it is possible that a very small cost of investment may have a very substantial high value of market value. For example, land owned by a company before 50 years, it was acquired at 1 lakh rupees per acre, and it is just lying in your investment in another SPV. Don't assume that it is 10 lakhs investments, forget it. It's a small amount as compared to the overall assets of the company. It is possible that 10 acres which that company is holding is worth 5,000 crores. We don't know that, depending on the location, it can substantially swing the valuation. So don't ignore any valuation just because the cost of it is very small, because underlying assets could be very valuable. There could be other non-operating surplus assets, maybe sometimes a vacant flat or some shut down factory. Then you take into account again the market value of those assets and the net of tax basis. You may have surplus cash, that means investment in the liquid mutual funds or a fixed deposit in the bank. That also you need to add separately to the enterprise value. Many companies have contingent liabilities, which could be for excise, income tax, or any other claims by a customer, or it could be have a contingent assets in the form of a claim for the raw material supplier, or some arbitration claim, which is matter which is under arbitration, which may be received after some time. So that also you need to either apply a probability or take a legal opinion based on the underlying values or amounts, and appropriately adjust in the valuation, either addition or as a deletion. Loan funds you need to remove. If you have a preference share capital and with no conversion rights, then it is a liability in nature. You need to then reduce it from the enterprise value. However, there could be CCPS, which is compulsorily convertible preference shares. In that case, they are akin to equity shares, and you need to value it as more like an equity share depending on the underlying conditions attached to those instruments. ESOPs and warrants, similar things will happen, because depending on the facts of those instruments or the conditions attached to those instruments or warrants, you need to capture it in your calculations. If there are any tax concessions, you need to take into account the present value of those tax concessions and add that to the value. So these are some of the common adjustments which you need to make to the underlying valuation when you arrive at the enterprise value to finally arrive at the value of equity shares. Some indicative guidelines, and friends, this is again only indicative in nature, that if it's a knowledge-based companies, which could be based on your BPO, KPO, or software companies, it could be income method approach or market approach. If it is a manufacturing company, income, market, as well as asset approach. If it's a very heavily asset heavy company, brand-driven companies, which could be Godrej, Hindustan Unilever, or any other FMCG company, you need to take into account income and market, because you may have a very low asset base for such company. Startup companies typically is an income approach. There may not be a market comparable company, so generally it is an income approach. Limited life projects, which could be a road project or a power plant, where you are going to own only for 10 years or 15 years, and thereafter it will go in the hands of government or any other party. Then you need to take into account the cash flows which these projects will give it to you over a period of the life of the project. Investment and property companies are generally based, worked out using asset method on a fair value of underlying investment basis. And companies going for liquidation naturally will be based on asset basis because there is no going concern valuation left for liquidation companies. Some of the issues which you come across while doing a valuation is the sustainability and scalability of business model. Many times you are given a projection which says that today I have a turnover of 100, it will become 500 in the next 5 years. Now you need to get into the details and justify whether such kind of scalability is possible. You may have a manufacturing capacity, but whether the market exists for such kind of a huge growth in the turnover or the profits. Sometimes you are not in a position to measure the risk, which is in many cases, some unique industries, it is very difficult. Many times industries are dependent on the government. Say, for example, some of the power companies were shut for so many years because gas was not supplied to them. Now there is an inherent risk. However, the entire asset is ready for the operation. Thinly traded or dormant script, you will not have a market price, so you will have to use the alternate methods of valuation. Startup companies, I'm covering it through a separate slide. Some of the challenges in the startup companies. Now, friends, many times I've seen some valuation reports where for startup companies, the valuations are on a skyrocket basis. They've been valued, and I always urge the members that you apply your reasonableness while valuing such companies because it is possible. Based on your report, somebody will invest in those companies, and if it is highly inflated because it's all ultimately it's a startup, so no, it's anybody's guess as to how such companies will prevail over a future point of view. In that case, you need to capture in your calculation enough cushion that if something is going wrong, how this company will ultimately be valued. Loss-making companies, the biggest challenge is that you don't have a multiplier to be applied to a maintainable EBITDA because there is a negative result. In that case, you may have to look at either the income approach of DCF or you may have to look at the asset approach and you just value those assets because companies not having profits. Sometimes it is very difficult to even find a comparable company. A peculiar industry, you may not have a comparable company in India. Many times as a valuer, we look at the other geographies. For example, I'm looking at an automobile parts company in India. There is no comparable companies in India which is listed, but there is a comparable companies in Germany which is listed. In that case, I may apply those multipliers by duly adjusting it for the Indian scenario. Then there is also something called illiquidity discount and control premium. Our valuation standards of the institute gives the guidance for the valuers that in what circumstances and how you need to make the adjustment for illiquidity discount or control premium. Valuation for conglomerates, I explained you the Hindustan Lever adjustment where you have many businesses which are under one roof. In that case, you will have to do sum of parts and that becomes a extremely involved exercise. So many times when you are approached for doing a valuation of a conglomerate, be careful because you will need to estimate the time required for doing the valuation in such a way that your time cost is covered because we are not allowed to charge fees based on the success of the transaction as per our institute guidelines or as per the registered valuer rules also. In that case, you will have to mostly in all the cases you have to go on the time required basis. So you have to estimate the time. Say you estimate 35 hours, and because it is conglomerate, you have to do a 5 valuation instead of 1. In that case, your number of hours could not 30. Estimate it properly and then give the quotation for your proposal for the valuation to the client. Otherwise, you may end up doing the valuation at a substantially low fees. Friends, I thought that I will display to you certain deals which are recently happened and also tell you how typically when you read such newspaper articles this particular transaction has got. So here I have given in JB Chemicals and Pharmaceutical Company, which was in KKR, they made an investment for 54%, 3,100 crore was paid, which was at 745.61 per share. Uh, typically, by reverse working, in the next slide, I will try to show you how typically the multiples needs to be worked out. So if 3,111 crore was for a 54% stake, the total equity value becomes say 5,762. If there are debt in the company, that means loans in the company, you need to add that to arrive at an enterprise value. Here there was no debt, so the enterprise value is also 5,762 crores. Then I have given certain parameters. I mean the other relevant numbers: revenue, EBITDA, PAT, profit after tax, net worth, and then last three numbers are the derived numbers. That enterprise value to EBITDA multiple in this transaction was 15 times. Price to earning multiple was 21 times. Revenue multiple they got was 3 times. Now these are, friends, of course, based on 2020 consolidated numbers, because transaction happened in July 2020. So for this analysis, I have used 2020 numbers. Maybe in reality, the two parties may have used some different numbers. But as an outsider, without being involved in the transaction, you will not have these parameters. So you need to derive these parameters. So this is just to give you an indication that when you read in the newspaper that 54% of JB Chemicals and Pharmaceutical KKR buys for 3,111 crores, you read such articles and keep the newspaper aside. But that's not the end of it. You need to analyze in this way to know that, okay, this industry, this is the broad range of multiple which they got. The next slide is on the Piramal Good transaction, where they got 3,523 crores for 20% divestment, which resulted into a value of enterprise value of 20,300 crores. Of course, you can read this later on because this is available. So I have just worked out that consideration was 3,523 for 20%. Equity value works out to 17,617 crores. There was a debt in the company, so enterprise value becomes 20,300. EBITDA 1,436 crores. Revenue was 5,419 crores. The enterprise value to EBITDA is around 14 times. Revenue multiple they got was 3.75 times. Again, these are based on some of the numbers which are available in the public domain. I have worked out, not that the parties would have used the same parameters, but this is just to give you a flavor, friends, that when you read about a particular transaction, what further you need to do to make your knowledge base a little more activated and stronger. That tomorrow, if a similar company comes to you for valuation, you will know in the back of your mind that, okay, Piramal's got around 14 times of EBITDA. So at least you know the range in which the transactions are happening. This is only for that purpose. Very quickly to cover before we end the session is certain challenges in the startup valuation. See, the startup valuation, the problem is that you are banking on only the person who has started this startup and also his ability and his technical knowledge. You don't have any, most of the times you don't have any historical data. It's either the first year or just the second year. There is a high amount of cash burn which is right now happening. So that's why there is no positive EBITDA, there is no profit positive tax, profit before tax or after tax. So you have very limited data inputs which are available. Biggest challenge in a startup is uncertainty over achieving the projections. Now, as I was mentioning, somebody may say that, okay, this is very minor operation today, but after 10 years it can become a substantially high operations, and one wants to value based on that. Now your challenge will be, as a valuer, how strong you believe that the projections which are submitted to you can be achieved, and that's where your ability to analyze the operations of the company becomes extremely important. Founder's credibility, I think, is the gets the maximum marks here, because he should be technically be competent, and also have a intention wise also it should be in a position to achieve the goal which it is selling to the investor at this juncture. What is the customer traction? What is the stage of development? Sometimes it is just at a very preliminary stage, and your product may fail going forward. Sometimes it is a mature product and prototype, everything is succeeded, and in that case your ability to visualize could be much better. In most of the startup valuation, you have no comparable companies. In many times you don't even get the proper detail for the recent deals also in a similar space. So you need to struggle a lot for the data. And there are some innovative methods of valuation also being followed by certain valuers, which could be uh, number of customers into a multiplier, actual cash burn in next 2 years into a multiplier, number of connections, or I mean the registration into a particular multiplier. So there are different methodologies which valuers are using to justify the valuation. Being a chartered accountant, we are generally a little conservative as compared to other professionals. So when you analyze such projections, be very careful, have justification. You look at the parameters which are being used for arriving at these projections, satisfy yourself. Generally, discount rate applied to startup valuations are much higher side as compared to an established company. So if I'm valuing a say Associated Cement company, which is an established, very old company with a clear capacity which is available, as compared to that, there's a startup. Your discount rate for both these companies will be materially different, because in another second case, startup, you have a very high risk of achieving these projections as compared to the established, already profit making and stable company. Now, very quickly to just cover future valuers bill. Of course, friends, please keep in mind this is only a bill based on various inputs which the government will receive from various stakeholders. The bill may go through certain changes, but I thought it may be relevant for you because this is a complete game changer for the valuers. So what is being contemplated in this bill is the National Institute of Valuers. So if you a valuer, you will have to be part of this National Institute of Valuers, which will be established to promote the development and regulate the valuation profession, to protect the interest of users of valuation services. So this is covering both valuers as well as the users of our valuation report. So as we go along, they have also made some transitional parameters that if you are already a registered valuer, they have given some mechanism of how you become part of this National Institute of Valuers. And the framework of National Institute of Valuers is that they will have a governing council, committee of valuers, they will have valuation standard committee, audit committee, and administrative law department, which will clarify various legal aspects of the any issues which may arise. The peculiar reason why they have formed a valuation standard committee is to recommend and review the valuation standards and valuation guidelines. Now, here I was just referring to you that although CA Institute has come out with the valuation standard, tomorrow if this National Institute of Valuers will come, all the valuers will have to first register with this NIV. So we may be a member of a CA Institute also. We will have to also become member of the National Institute of Valuers, and that National Institute of Valuers will devise their own standards. It is not necessary that they will go by what CA Institute has formed. There may be a change. We don't know as it evolves. We'll have to wait and watch. But point I'm driving is that there is a possibility that the complete valuation standards which a valuer will have to follow could be different than ICAI valuation standards. They've also put power to inspect and investigate, something which is something like search and seizure, settlement of contraventions, which is similar to what today we have in SEBI in the form of consent terms, consent filings forms, registration of valuers under different asset classes, which we already have today also. Now they have put classification under this. So you will have valuation entities, which is like a firm or a company which is registered as a valuer under the NIV, National Institute of Valuer. You will have an associate valuer who is entitled under section 49 and registered with the National Institute of Valuer. And as it is there in our CA Institute, if you cross that 5 years or more of experience, you will become a fellow valuer. They have also introduced one category called honorary valuer, person who has extraordinarily contributed to the valuation profession. They will make that person as an honorary valuer. However, that honorary valuer will not be able to carry out the valuation exercise, valuation services. He will not be able to provide because he is just an honorary member. So this is the broad framework under which NIV will operate. The next two slides are on the various financial instruments, which I think we have covered, so I will not take your time. We have about 15 minutes left for the question and answer, and I will leave it to the organizers to structure the question and answer in such a way that maximum number of questions we can take. So may I request the organizers to post the questions so that I can address them?
All the attenders are requested to raise the question answer in Q&A section so that it can be answered one by one.
Today I don't. As of now, I'm not seeing any question in that
No,
Q&A.
as of now, there is no question. No query has been raised by the.
Okay, somebody has written PowerPoint presentation is not visible. Please share the slide. Your slides are not on the. Okay, that was I think the time when it got. I'm sorry for that. Then can you show previous slide also?
How to take up the course?
Sorry, I'm not. What is
So,
that?
sir, the first question is how to take up the course.
How to take?
Valuation course only.
See, now as we speak, because National Institute of Valuer is not yet fully operational, it is still in a bill form. As we speak, you will have to wait for the CA Institute ICAI RVO to come out with a training program. If you want to do it through ICAI, if you want to do it through other institution, you will have to keep watching the other institutes program for valuation. It is a dedicated program where you will have to attend all the sessions of those programs. And once you clear that program and you have a certificate for the participation, you can apply to the IBBI through for the purpose of your exam, that you are entitled for the exam. And once you have made the preparation for the exam, you will have to block a slot for exam. When we appeared, it was conducted by BSE, Bombay Stock Exchange. In their training center, the exams were conducted in different slots. I believe now they also have used some other services of other training institutes which are also conducting the exam. And that exam is, friends, conducted by IBBI and not ICAI RVO. ICAI RVO only plays a intermediate role of taking your application and forwarding it to the IBBI. The ultimate exam is governed by the IBBI, and it is in the form of multiple choice questions, and they also ask certain financial calculations also, which has higher number of marks. So in my time, I think each question had 10 marks, where you had to do calculation and then give a tick on the right answer. So that is the starting point. If you are an eligible chartered accountant, then you will be able to do this course first, which will be announced on a regular basis. So keep looking at the ICAI RVO website. There is a separate website of ICAI RVO. There they announce the program. So nowadays, because of this COVID situation, you can attend the online courses. In our time, when we appeared, we had to go and physically attend at the WRC office, facility. Whereas I believe now they are doing online classes, so you can sit at your residence or office and attend those classes. And once you attend those classes, which covers all the major areas of valuation and the other laws which I just mentioned, sale of goods and contract and various other government-related subjects, there you will be then eligible for appear for the exam. And once you cross the exam, you have to file your application with ICAI RVO that I have cleared the exam, along with the paperwork which they will give it to you in channels. And after ICAI RVO satisfy itself that your application is fine, they will forward that to IBBI, and finally IBBI will give you a registration. That's the process. Next question, please.
Participating preference share for new startup.
How to value the participating
Preference share.
So for a startup, many times the investor comes with a condition that I will invest in a preference shares. However, based on the underlying performance of the startup, because see what happens when the investor comes at the investment stage, he is not aware how this company will do. So then they will have a right to convert into equity share based on certain parameters. So if the company achieves the projections, then certain number of shares they will get against the preference shares. If the company does lower than what they have projected, then the more number of equity shares. So dilution will be more. Now, what as a valuer, how do you value such instrument? What you will have to do is to study the underlying conditions which they have prescribed, and then make your best estimate that in which slot this actual performance of the company is likely to sort of fall, and based on that parameters you will have to value such instrument. In many times this instrument also carries certain differential voting rights. So for example, they will say that main equity share will have a higher equity participation, whereas the preference shares will get, for every 2 preference shares they will get only 1 equity right. So those adjustments also we'll have to make to arrive at the per share value. So there is a question I can see on the chat box which says, I attended a 30-hour training by institute and passed the exam in 2017. Whether same is held for valuation? Unfortunately, no. Unfortunately, no, because this is not the. This was the certificate course of the institute which you conducted. So only advantage you will get is the some reduction in the fees for this ICAI RVO course. But that whole certificate will not be valid. Sorry, somebody speaking.
वो बोला था भाई करिए है अच्छा है काम है तो आप दे सकते हो बोलो
Sorry, I can't hear anything properly. But anyway, you can give me the next question, please.
आप फिर तो क्या
Is there any other question?
No, till now, no other question.
अच्छा
So maybe yeah. So just friends, I think just at the cost of repetition, somebody speaking, but I can't hear. Is it some other participant which is not aware?
When is the next ICAI RVO course batch
So
available?
you will have to look at the ICAI RVO website where they will display whenever they announce a course. And my suggestion to you is that before this National Institute of Valuer come into is enacted, if you can clear the exam, then the pass through will be very easy. That means anybody who is a registered valuer today will have to only fill up certain form and qualify. If he qualifies for the conditions, which will be very easy, you will become a valuer, registered valuer under the NIV also, as per the current draft. So there is a transition provision which is available. So my suggestion is to clear the exam as fast as possible and keep your registration ready, so that whenever this NIV, National Institute of Valuer, is enacted, you are entitled to straight become the member of that institute also. So you keep looking at the ICAI RVO website. If suppose no immediate course is there, I have seen some chartered accountant friends also doing the registered valuer course through some other institutes. But I explained you why I always prefer ICAI RVO, because my own institute will always process my application much faster because they have all my data. So and don't get frightened by the exam. Exam actually is very basic. We were not aware about the format of the exam when we were in the first batch, so we were completely in dark. But now I think lots of guidance is available. Lots of suggested question papers are available in the book form. So you have a good amount of material available. Just jump into it. It's going to be a wonderful area of practice. Forget the monetary aspect connected to it. I would always feel, if you are engaged in the valuation exercise, your vision becomes very broad. You will be able to look at various industries, various instruments in a much better way as compared to what maybe we are today practicing. So there is no harm. It will not harm you, but it will always have some benefit. So I think that's it from my side. And we can conclude. We are almost.
Thank you, sir,
Yes, please.
for your for sharing your knowledge and experience. Now I request C. Jawad Shah to give formal well-deserved vote of thanks to our learned speaker.
Thank you, Ravi Bhai. It is my great privilege and honor to propose vote of thanks to our learned speaker of this session, C.A. Sujal Shah. I, on behalf of Boyoli Central CP Study Circle, propose heartily vote of thanks to learned speaker for sharing his views and knowledge in best possible manner. He has briefly provided the history of valuation process followed in last 30 years. He has provided brief idea on how to enroll and prepare for valuation exam. he has provided the areas under which valuation is required to be done, and various acts under which this valuation is the compulsion for which we need to do all this process. He has provided various methods of valuation and valuation concepts, type of assets for which valuation is need to be done, and the
Yeah,
I think so. There is some connectivity issue. So
Sujal
thank
sir.
you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
yeah, thank you. My pleasure. And all the best luck to everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.